Hello everyone, welcome back to Bonepile Miniatures. In this video we will continue our discussion of the Bonepile Miniatures Mixed Rule Set, which is our version of the 9th edition of Warhammer Fantasy. This is video number 4 of a series. And in previous videos we have talked about the basic rules, the turn phase rules, and the special rules, or what I call keywords. And now we are going to discuss what I call the Army Detail Rules. And this covers topics like troop types, weapons and armor, and such things like that. And I recommend that you watch this video series in order, starting from video number 1. If you have not watched the previous videos, I recommend that you pause this video and watch the others in order to get a full understanding of what will be covered in this video. You can also study our rules at our hobby blog at bonepileminiatures.com. Look for the Rules Supplement tab and you will find these rules as well as many other supplements we have written. We have produced these videos on our rule set in order to clarify what rules we are using during our battle reports. So we have produced these videos for informational purposes, as well as for sharing our ideas for the 9th edition. We are not trying to compete with other versions of Warhammer Fantasy 9th edition, but feel free to use our ideas in your own games, and you can certainly post questions and comments below. As you watch these videos, you will learn that we have taken many of our ideas from the Warhammer Armies Project, but we also have many of our own ideas incorporated. Now, as we review these documents, keep in mind that they are written in a very short and concise language and are meant for those already familiar with 8th edition rules. Many of the phrases are missing pronouns and prepositions, but that's all in an attempt to keep the text short and the sections small. On the documents, all the text in black is consistent with 8th edition rules. And then all the text in red are the changes that we use. So during this discussion, I will be skimming through the text in black and focusing mainly on the text in red. And so without further delay, let's get into the discussion. So here is the first page, and the first topic covered is troop types. The first changes I want you to notice is that each troop type has a unit strength value added to it. And this is to guide us through the unit strength rules that we have added to the rule set. And we have spoken extensively about unit strength throughout these videos, especially in videos 1 and 2. So each troop type shows the unit strength for that troop choice, indicated by the US and then a number. So for example, infantry have a unit strength of 1, cavalry have a unit strength of 3, and so forth. There's also some other changes to troop types that I did not highlight in red, or they would have been too pervasive. And that is the choices given under each troop type for the base sizes. I picked up these definitions for base sizes from the Warhammer Armies Project. And I think these choices for base sizes helps with modeling your army. But I didn't highlight those changes in red because there would have been so many of them that other changes would have been lost in the weeds. And you normally only worry about base sizes during modeling anyways, and not during the actual gameplay. So with those two tidbits out of the way, let's look at the rest of the changes to this section. So the next change shows up under Monstrous Infantry. And this troop type now has the Fear rule, regardless of what the profile says in its army book. And I think that makes sense. I picked up that change from the Warhammer Armies Project again. However, I am trying to keep an eye out for troop choices where that does not make sense. But so far, I haven't seen any problems with that. So we are following that rule. And then the next change is under Monstrous Cavalry. They have also gained the Fear rule, as well as Impact Hits 1. And I've been fine with those rules so far as well. After that, Swarms have gained the Expendable rule, which I explained in video number 3. And I am a big fan of this new rule, and I think it applies well to swarms. Next, there's a change under war beasts, who also have gained the expendable rule, and I think that rule fits them well too. Next, monstrous beasts also gained the fear rule, and impact hits 1. And then the next change is with chariots. There's a note that the beasts of burden take a -1 penalty to their movement ability. And I think that makes sense. And then everything else with chariots stays the same as with 8th edition. And that finishes off this section on troop types. And I think that section is very straightforward and easy to understand. And so we're just going to move on to the next section. Now we're going to cover weapon choices. And we will look at close combat weapons first. And as you can see, there's only a few changes here. The first one is under great weapons. The range of the weapon is in close combat. They give a +2 strength bonus. They have the requires 2 hands rule. And we've added that they give a -1 initiative penalty. And this replaces the always strikes last rule in the 8th edition. And I know that the Warhammer Armies Project did a -2 initiative penalty, but we decided to just do a -1. And I think it still demonstrates that these great weapons are a little slower to wield. And we think that a -1 penalty is just right. After the great weapons, we get to spears when mounted. And they are only used on the charge, but they give a +1 bonus to initiative. After that, we've added a new weapon called pikes to the range of weapons available. And that reads, the range is in close combat. The weapon strength is as the user's strength. It can fight in extra ranks up to 2, but note here that the Warhammer Armies Project did 3 ranks. We're just doing 2. It requires 2 hands. It gives a strength bonus of 1 when the model is charged in the front. And it works against war beasts, cavalry, monstrous infantry, monstrous beasts, monstrous cavalry, chariots, and monsters. Note that infantry are not on that list, and I think that makes sense. Pikes also give a +3 initiative bonus when they are charged. And I think it makes sense to add pikes to the list. The next change is under the lance weapon, which can only be used when mounted. It reads that the range is in close combat, and there's a +2 strength bonus, and it can only be used on the charge. And then we've added a 2+ initiative bonus. So I do like these changes to initiative bonuses, because it is connected with the length or the reach of the weapon. So it makes sense that there would be bonuses to striking order with spears, pikes, and lances. And I picked up these changes from the Warhammer Armies Project, and they really make a lot of sense to me. I like them a lot. Next, we're going to move on to the missile weapons section. And you can see that we have added blowpipes. We got this idea once again from the Warhammer Armies Project. They have a range of 12 inches. The weapon has weapon strength 1, and it fires multiple shots 2. It is quick to fire and has poisoned attacks. And I think that's a really cool addition. Now I do want to note that the Warhammer Armies Project added multiple shots to most missile weapons. But we did not follow that and kept with the 8th edition rules on the rest of the missile weapons. So they get each 1 shot, unless specified by the multiple shots rule. And I think that giving everyone multiple shots defeats the purpose of anyone having that special rule. And even though it seems like it should be quick to fire a bow weapon, if you've ever tried to shoot something, operating the weapon is easy. The aiming is the hard part, and takes more time than most people realize. So we vetoed the idea of everyone having multiple shots. Maybe the intention of the Warhammer Armies Project was to make shooting a bigger factor in the game, but we are satisfied with the 8th edition version of shooting, so we stuck with that. And now let's move on to the armor section. And yes, the way I spell armor tells you which side of the pond I live on. But the changes we have here to the armor section is probably one of my favorite changes that was influenced by the Warhammer Armies Project, which gives more choices in the grades of armor. No longer do we have just light and heavy armor. And as you can see, we have medium armor, which gives a 2+ armor bonus for a 5+ armor save roll, given no other bonuses. And then there's full plate armor. That gives a 4+ bonus, or a 3+ armor save, given no other bonuses. There's also a change to shields, that they cannot defend rear attacks. And then there's also a buckler choice. They give a +1 armor bonus, or a 6+ armor save if used alone. But they end up giving a 5+ parry save instead if they are used with a hand weapon, which I think will be the case very often. So that ends the armor section, and the next section is on unit commands, which includes champions, standard bearers, and musicians. So under unit champions there is a new rule, which is called Follow Me. And that says that units with a champion can re-roll fails under the following situations: march due to nearby enemies, reform, and restraint from pursuing. And this rule came also from the Warhammer Armies Project. The rules for Lookout Sir are the same as 8th edition, and also standard bearers have no changes. And we still do the last stand rule with them. Then we come to musicians, and they have the same rules as the 8th edition. They have Onwards Men, Form on Me, and the Swift Reform rule. And for some reason, I feel like I forget these unit command rules more than anything else. I don't know about you. Then after the unit command section, we come to the characters section. And the characters only have one change on this entire page. And it says that characters cannot join units of a higher unit strength than it unless specified. And that seems pretty straightforward and clear. Otherwise, placement and spells and shooting, Lookout Sir, Make Way are all the same. Challenges are the same as 8th edition as well. So let's move on to the next page. And this page continues on with the character rules. Overkill is the same, mounts are the same, and the general's inspiring presence is the same. But there are a couple of changes to the Battle Standard Bearer rules. We already mentioned in other places that the Battle Standard Bearer adds +2 to combat resolution. And we also have a small addition to the Hold Your Ground rule. It says that if a Battle Standard Bearer is a large target or is mounted on one, the range for this rule is 18 inches. And we added that to be consistent with the Inspiring Presence rule for generals, which also increases to 18 inches under those circumstances. And then after characters we come to monsters. We did not change anything with that. It was tempting to change the Killed Handler reaction table, but we haven't changed anything with that up to this time. And then finally we come to the last section, which is on Warmachines. And all the basic rules are the same, except that we made a change that shows up after the panic rules. And it says that Warmachines are soft cover for the crew and hard cover for others behind it. And that's because while the crew is loading and operating the machine, they are not always fully covered, and they have heads and arms and such vulnerable to missile fire. But other units behind the war machine get the full benefit of the cover. Most of the machines are made of metal and wood and should easily block missile fire. And then it also reads that when war machines are defeated or the crew has fled, They remain as obstacles whether intact or demolished. So what that means is that war machines are large bulks of metal and wood, and simply just don't disappear when destroyed. They remain on the field. Just remove the crew and leave the machine. They stay on the field as obstacles. So now we're going to move on to the next page, where we will cover rules about specific war machines. And here we are. And this is the last page of this chapter that we will cover in this video. So the first war machine that we get to is the bolt thrower. And you will see that our club does not support the idea of laser-guided artillery. These are effective but still crude technologies compared to what we have in our day. So the bolt thrower changes say, mark the target. I suggest using a token or a coin, a bingo chip or whatever that's about 1 inch in diameter that you want to use. And use that to mark what you are aiming for. Then roll the scatter dice. Also substitute the artillery dice with a D6. And then subtract the unit's ballistic skill from the artillery dice to a minimum of 0. Also resolve natural ones as a misfire. Hits and misfires are as normal. Now let me explain. Yes, we are rolling scatter and artillery dice for the bolt thrower. But we figure that the bolt thrower is probably the most accurate of all the war machines. And as such, we don't use the normal artillery dice, which can range up to 10 inches. And we think that a 10-inch miss seems unrealistic for the bolt thrower. So we decided to substitute the artillery dice with a D6, which will give the machine a smaller degree of inaccuracy. But then you also subtract the crew's ballistic skill from that roll, down to a minimum of 0. And 0 means that you are dead on target. We like this rule because it brings the unit's ballistic skill into play, and brings a little bit of inaccuracy to the bolt thrower, but not too much. Most crews will have a ballistic skill of at least 3, so most of the time the crew will miss the target by maybe an inch or 2, and often they might be right on target. And since the D6 doesn't have a misfire score on it, we substitute that with a natural roll of 1. And so if you roll a misfire, then consult the misfire chart as normal. Also, a direct hit on the scatter dice ignores the artillery dice as normal too. Resolve the shot as a direct hit on target. So effectively, if someone wants to use a bolt thrower to target a single infantry model, it can be done, but sometimes you will miss, as a 1-inch target may be difficult to hit. But the better the crew's ballistic skill, the more accurate they will be, and more likely to make the shot. Now the next war machine is the cannon, and we made that a little different too. So first of all, under the cannon rules, there's a multiple wounds of D6/D3 on the direct/bounce. And I hope that's clear what that means. Cannons cause D6 wounds on the direct hit and D3 wounds on the bounce hits. And then the procedure is to mark the spot you are aiming for with some kind of a coin or bingo chip or whatever that's about 1 inch in diameter, and then roll the scatter and artillery dice. Resolve the misfires on the misfire chart, and if a hit is scored, the shot is on target. Otherwise, move the marker according to the scatter dice direction. Then, subtract the crew's ballistic skill from the artillery dice score to a minimum of 0. Any model at the initial ground strike takes a direct hit. And so the big change here is to use the scatter dice and then subtract the ballistic skill of the crew. The artillery die's maximum range is up to 10, which is probably too much for a cannon. While not as accurate as a bolt thrower, the cannon still has a barrel that should make it generally easier to aim than some of the other war machines. So that is why we subtract the crew's ballistic skill from the artillery score as well. So unless you happen to roll a very low score on the artillery dice, most of the time the cannon will miss the target by a few inches. And so effectively what this change will do is it will make it fairly difficult to use a cannon to sniper a lone model or monster. That's because there will almost always be some amount of inaccuracy to the shot. Of course, you could still roll a direct hit on the scatter dice and make that lucky shot, but this will make it a little easier for monsters to stay alive in the game. And that is one of the common complaints about the Warhammer Fantasy 8th edition, is that monsters died too quickly. And many times they are killed with a laser-guided cannon, which seems too unrealistic. Or the same might apply to a lone general or a lone wizard. So these rules make cannons a better weapon against large units of infantry. If you aim at the center of a unit, most likely you are still going to hit the unit somewhere. But lone models are less likely to get sniped by a cannon. You can try, and you may get lucky sometimes. And of course, if you are way off target, you might even hit one of your own friendly units that might be nearby. Or you might take out a tree or a fence or something else nearby. Now let me continue reading the cannon rules just to be clear. And now the way you play the bounce is that you roll the artillery dice again. And if a misfire scores, then there's no bounce. Otherwise, the cannonball bounces according to the distance rolled. It bounces in the continued direction from the cannon and the first point of impact. It stops in impassable terrain. Then the question of who's been hit, it says, all models between the bounce and the final landing are hit. It hits one model per rank in a unit, but if it hits a chariot or shrine or any kind of a monstrous creature and is not slain, the path does not continue. Next we will move on to great cannons. And they follow all the same rules as regular cannons, except they also deal d6 wounds on the bounce, where regular cannons only do d3 wounds on the bounce. So effectively they will kill more troops on average. Next, stone throwers and fire throwers are the same as 8th edition. And since these machines are less accurate, they follow the full effects of the artillery dice and can sometimes be way off target. And then I have a final change with the War Machine misfire chart. And this is a general chart that applies to all war machines. So you will consult this chart whether the misfire came from a bolt thrower, a cannon, or a stone thrower, or anything else. And we wrote this chart with variety in mind, and so each die score gives a different result. And so you roll on this misfire chart using a d6. And on this chart the results are more severe with the lower numbers. So let's start reading through the chart. Number 1 says, destroyed. The war machine is destroyed. And remember here just to take away the crew and leave the machine on the table as an obstacle. And then number 2 says, injury. The war machine wounds one of its own crew. No saves allowed. That's pretty straightforward. Next is number 3, which says damaged. The war machine range is halved for the remainder of the game, and it is destroyed if it ever is rolled twice on the same war machine. And so if you had any crew left when you get that result and your machine has been destroyed, then you would just remove the crew from the game. And then for number 4, it says malfunction. It cannot fire this turn or the next turn of the controlling player. And so basically you lose 2 shots with this result. Next is number 5, which says, "Oops, the war machine fires off in an ARI direction. Nobody hurt, shoot next turn." So this result just means that you lose one shot, and you can fire the next turn. And then finally there's number 6, which says, "We fixed it. Slight delay, re-roll the misfire." Both the artillery and the scatter dice. And so with this result you get to try again. Hopefully you don't roll another misfire, but if you did, you'd have to roll on the misfire chart one more time. And in the rare case, if you end up repeatedly scoring misfires and rolling number 6 on the misfire chart with the same machine in the same turn, there's a 2-time limit before you run out of time and that war machine loses its turn. It should be a rare occurrence, but just in case you do, there is a 2-time limit. If you get it a third time, then the war machine forfeits its turn and that shot cannot go off. And I think those rules are pretty clear, and it's obvious that these results apply universally to any of the war machines. Any of them could cause any of these results. This makes it so you only need to memorize one chart for all the war machines. And that is it. We are done with this chapter on the Army detail rules. And I know that we like all the changes we've shown you here, and we hope you do too. And in summary, we've added unit strength values and some keywords to each troop type. We've also added pikes and blowpipes to the list of weapons, and also changed some keywords to a few of those weapons. Initiative bonuses being the most common change to the longer weapons. And we added new choices in the armor section. There's a new follow me rule under the unit champions. There's a few minor changes to characters. And war machines provide soft or hard cover depending if you are the crew or another unit behind it. And they are also left on the field after the crew is dead or fled. And we changed the accuracy of bolt throwers, cannons, and then made them a universal misfire chart for all war machines. So we are almost at the end of our video series for the Bonepile Miniatures mixed rule set. Our next major chapter will be on the terrain rules, and that will be video number 5. And that will cover obstacles, hills, rivers, and things like that. And that will be the last major chapter we will cover in this series. And then after that we will briefly cover some minor topics and provide videos on some of our supplementary material. You can also visit bonepileminiatures.com to learn more. We hope you've been enjoying this video series, and we hope to see you at the next video about our terrain rules. And until then, and as always, happy wargaming!